Welcome, everybody, to the second Talking Stations EuroShow. I'm still a beginner at this, clearly, but I'm glad you guys are here enjoying it with me. I have two people here, regulars on Talking Stations. One, both OG Talking Stations, to be completely honest, from the, here from the beginning, essentially.
The early days. This is a back to the roots episode.
Yeah, it's kind of a back to the roots episode almost to some degree. So we have Caleb, obviously. Hi, say hi, Caleb.
Hi, Caleb. Hi, guys.
And we also actually have Metal here. Hey, Metal.
Hello. I heard you pause when you were about to say people. We
Well,
have a few Go ahead.
You're always, always trying to take me down a peg, some way, shape, or form.
No, I was like, are we people?
No, no, it wasn't that. It wasn't that at all. Anyway, show today we have a few things, interesting things. First thing we're basically going to get to is some kind of like just some light stuff to start off with, essentially. So what should we go with first? Do we want to do the CCP's kind of sword presentation, or do we want to do the
I think we should do the website first.
Should we do the website? Yeah, let's do the website.
Yeah, I think so, because I was happily surprised by that little polished gem. It's very pretty.
Okay. Yeah, so essentially, CCP is kind of starting to redesign their website, specifically their sort of like the news side of their website. This is going to be this actually does affect me quite a lot, because I use that part of the site a lot on the Sunday shows to sort of to find articles to bring up and this, that, and the other. But they're redesigning the look of it.
Yeah, it's one of those pages that a lot of us media nerds have open and just push refresh all the time. Same as that nice collation site that that Dirk McGurk used to run.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's slightly
Total Eve.
Yeah, Total Eve, which is, I think it's slightly discontinued, but it was basically one of those pages, right? So Reddit, Hobo Leaks, Eve News, and Total Eve, and you just refresh and see what's actually happening. And then, of course, your tweet feed. So from a feed point of view, it's very nice to see this being polished and very well looking. And CCP has had a history of, I don't know if you can say procrastinating when it comes to web stuff. They've always tried to keep up a little bit, but it seems to have gotten slightly low priority, even though they know that they kind of needed to fix everything. They did it with the patch web page a while ago, and I really like the result on that. And this is basically the same feeling. It's like very nice, very shiny, good looking, easy to navigate. So
it's actually really nice to navigate in actual fact, because it's got a lot of cool features in actual fact. You have like their tagging stuff, so you're able to basically go through various different tags of various different forms to find various different things. You can obviously search Eve News, which is fantastic, especially for people like us who are trying to find news quickly on the fly. There is definitely moments where I'm like, they're about to cover something, I need to quickly find the article about that. So that's really useful. But just the whole presentation of it is really nice.
So crisp, and the meta tags, as you mentioned, the search stuff, it's amazing. I just hope that there's not too much that's not being caught by this, right?
Yeah.
Old posts, old dev blogs that might actually not really be caught by the search thing. But that's always the case when you're talking about old content, right? Getting that fit with your new look. I must say that my little dream, having watched this and enjoyed it a lot is that this actually gets applied to the MER, because then my mind would blow.
It's really good. It's really cool that they have articles all the way to 2016 in the at least in the sort of archive section, which is really cool. Like pretty much everything.
Is that when they changed it last time? Is that why it stops it?
Yeah, I think so.
There is an older section which basically goes to, I think, so, like some of the really old stuff, and you can go pretty ancient to there. Like, I mean,
but can you imagine if they did that, made sure that it actually covered all the way back to 2003? That would just be mind-blowingly cool.
That would be pretty crazy.
And it has Eve websites in general have lifespans, which I mean, if you're looking at something that ran in TMC, it's mostly gone unless it was ported over by Caleb to
yes,
INF.
I did. Several hundred articles by hand. It was horrible. Drupal is yuck. Anyone that suggests using some of those old content management systems should be shot.
And even News 24 had like an archive edition for all the stuff that was taken down. It was never ported over to the new stuff, so it's hard to find old information that would give you context to current day EVE Online. It takes people now like expertise to be able to dig that stuff up.
So I just wanted to, I went on quite a bit of a jaunt while you guys were talking just to see the oldest article on the EVE Online news site, and it is actually from 2003.
Yeah.
Wow, good job.
Pretty insane, right?
You know, one of the things
pretty awesome.
One of the things I did, because I work with databases, was and I was playing around with scraping or pulling data off websites at one point when I was playing EVE, and that was 2008 or 9.
Yeah.
And I went back and I scraped all the news and the patch notes from CCP's site and put it all into a database so I could search it. And then Andrew Groen announced that he was going to do a book about EVE Online, and I of course sponsored that, but also wrote him and said, hey, I have a database that has you could just search. And he's like, well, that would be great help, because he's gonna get any piece of information he can get. But when it came time to give it to him, I couldn't find the damn database, so all for nothing.
That sucks. Oh, well, maybe another time.
The point is that this has been an important thing for a lot of people for a long time, which is to get that quickly searchable, scannable, easy to find reference points to historical data.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And it's at least the more current kind of stuff is very well presented in this new the new news section of the site, which is pretty cool. The fact that they have tags on it as well is really, really awesome as well. Just go into patch notes, you find all the patch notes. Obviously, that's kind of how the whole system works, but it's pretty cool. Right. I mean, on to the next, I imagine. Right? Should we go to? So CCP basically had a presentation of their ceremonial swords, almost, right?
Yeah, it ties back to our last show, our premiere, where we talked a little bit about work culture in gaming, game design, and how CCP actually does stand out a little bit. And I just thought that when I saw this, I thought we should really have this on here, because CCP is a very, I'd say, very different work environment than I think most game development houses are. It's also now getting pretty old, right? It's almost like classic in the sense of how they do things, and they still have these weird things that I keep calling garage or upstart qualities. They still pretty much behave and act a lot like a very small and very edgy company. And the fact that they still have this sword ceremony, I just think it's amazing. And as I pointed out to Mac, every single sword is different. They are not the same. These are not like just mass produced. They are most likely, if I'm not mistaken, I used to actually do import-export of things like this for collectors. And I'm pretty sure these are the high quality handcrafted ones, which also would make sense with the fact that they are all unique. So I think it's kind of nice, and it's a good little tradition. And the fact that Hilma has recently expanded it with the 20-year thing is kind of funny. I'm wondering what they're going to do with the 30-year ceremony, so because then it would have to be, I don't know, full armor or a shield. I'm not entirely sure where they're going to land, but
be amazing with a shield. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm just inclined to say to CCP that if you're going to double down on this, maybe you should start building that actual Viking ship from scratch, like now. So it might be done by the 30-year mark, so you can all be sitting in that ship and celebrate the 30 years of development for CCP.
Yeah, I think
Hilmar's getting his 20-year sword, right?
Yeah, he's two-handed.
Big two-handed, like a long sword.
And before anyone starts complaining, yes, we know that kind of two-handed sword was not really a thing in the era of the actual Viking sword. So he's doing a little bit of an anachronism there, and someone should point that out to him, because, we know how nerds react when there's discrepancies like this.
Yeah. I think it was also... I think it's also sort of a degree of Icelandic tradition that like swords aren't given to women. I'm not sure what. I don't think it's a Me Too sort of thing in any way, shape, or form. Like I think it's very much like a very sort of Icelandic traditional kind of thing.
Do you really want to go there?
I just wanted to note that like we noticed it as well as you out in the audience as well. So like that was all. That was the only reason why I was saying that.
Wow.
I'm just gonna say that is historically inaccurate. If we're talking about Viking female warriors, this is pretty much agreed upon in academia by now.
Well, I think
the archaeology says Viking warriors were female as well. Not a lot, but enough to actually make it a thing. It is proven. It is agreed upon. So
I know,
I think
but Iceland went their own direction in many different ways with regards to, like Nordic culture in generalities. So, it's, I don't know. I don't know enough of the subject to know, but I would imagine it's probably something that's, very much a tradition thing. So yeah, just saying. But yeah, the whole having getting a shield would be a pretty cool thing as well for CCP to do.
Especially because then they could maybe do a little bit of an overlap with the skins in Eve, so the actual art on the shields would follow some of the color schemes of the skins inside the game, which would be sort of cool to see if you can decide which skin this matches.
Yeah, very true, actually.
Security team should, of course, have Popo skins.
That'd be funny. Anyway, that's the kind of like the light stuff, I imagine, that we have. the light Me Too stuff. But,
you could spin it another way. You could just say that Caleb wants to get women killed.
Oh God! Oh God! Please no! Not on International Women's Week, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But But okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick break, and then come back and get onto sort of like the main part of the show, which is going to be like a 20-minute conversation about like unique selling points and like Eve and Eve's competitors and that kind of stuff. So stick around. We'll be back in a moment.
It reminds me of Tron and Designers Republic and
Quiet, here we go.
And we're back, by the way, guys. But we were talking about the new Eve advert for the Grand Prix, which
it's so good.
I think we all kind of think it's really awesome.
It's such a nerd boner thing because it's got the design thing that reminds people of things like Tron, the old movie, and the visuals with the speed lines that's very anime Japanese manga, and then the whole letter stuff is so much a throwback to Designers Republic back in the 90s. It's just this 80s 90s retro vibe, and I really think it's so well made. It's maybe one of my favorite videos from CCP for quite a while.
That has Corinne Moore written all over it, doesn't it?
It does a little bit, but I'm not sure if it is Corin.
Sure.
We know that Corin did the Formation one, and that's also so fucking pretty.
Yeah, we showcased that on the last episode, in actual fact, I think. That was fantastic.
And this ties very well into what we're about to talk about, right? Because we just talked about the special culture in the workplace of CCP, and how I do think that it's still very different than most other places, unless, of course, it's an upstart. But there is this thing and this tradition, long tradition of CCP hiring from the player base. And the whole distance between the player base and CCP is so different than in other games. And I think this creates this cohesion between the players as stakeholders and CCP as the developers, or the janitors, as I'm pretty sure Hilmer used to call it all the time. And I think this just sets up why not only the game is unique, but also the player base, and especially also the developers. It is not something that you find elsewhere. Of course, you find parts and bits of it elsewhere, but in this flavor, you cannot get the equivalent anywhere.
So, like there's the odd occasion that you see like an article about like how, a developer has a member on their team, a dev on their team that was originally a former player kind of thing. But it's definitely doesn't feel as though it's anywhere near as like a normal thing than it does in sort of Eve and the Eve community kind of thing. Like, so many devs have been former Eve players. It's kind of actually quite crazy.
Yeah, and when you think about that, there's one thing that keeps amusing me a little bit. I usually end up in discussions with Eve players, and we start talking about CCP and CCP culture and what they do right and what they do wrong, mostly the latter. And the point is that I then end up saying, well, this is how they work. This is how it is inside CCP. This is how these people think. And they always end up screaming at me, how do you know? You're just a player. You're on the outside. And it's like, well, you clearly haven't been around long enough to know how this stuff works. Because if you took a randomized number of CCP developers, especially the ones that actually work on the game, right? I would say that there's a huge chance that at least a third, maybe even half of them, are former Eve players, right? And when I then say, well, I know some of the behaviors of someone like CCP Conric, because he used to be a player. He used to be arranging actual player meetups and events and stuff like that, and he was in court with people in Eve for years and years before he became a developer. Same with, oh, you don't know the guys that make the videos. Well, Merrill just told everyone the other day, well, Corin actually used to work for TMC/INN and then for TIS. And, well, we've worked with him for years before he even got snatched up by CCP. Same with CCP Rise, same with CCP Fozzy. All these guys used to play this game with us.
Yeah,
and with us.
I mean, even Soundwave was a former player before he became a dev. Like, you know, there's like old school devs that you kind of don't really think of as players, and they definitely were players before they were CCP devs. Like, you know, so it's quite crazy how many people have, you know, former and current members of CCP's dev team that used to be players.
And the way that
they're not necessarily the preferred type of game developer, though. But
well, they kind of are.
There.
No, I would say that they are the better developers in CCP when it comes to fixing the game. Because when it comes to procedural stuff, when you need to tie things into the game, maybe not coding wise or technically, they might not be the best developers. But well,
I didn't say better, best, or worst, or whatever, because I don't want to rate devs like that. There's just no way to do it. But I meant preferred as like company prefers developers. They prefer, I think, new blood as opposed to promoting within the Eve community.
It's just, I think it's just easier from a sort of a company and that particular standpoint. You know, coming from an industry and coming from a company sort of standpoint, to get your client, your staff, you know, on the right kind of viewpoint, the right perspective, the same perspective that you want them to be on, if they weren't players previously. Because I kind of feel like maybe, you know, as players, they would have their own individual viewpoint on, you know, on what Eve is, what Eve should be, and all that kind of stuff, right? Just thinking sort of from a business perspective.
I just don't agree with this. Oh, you need to hire experts and AAA title people from other games and things like that, because
Animal Crossing.
but it's important because if you look at some of the CCP developers that struggle, right, with working in CCP, they might fit well with the culture, but the fact that they didn't have the experience with Eve meant that they had fundamental disconnects on how the game works and how the community works, and that have led to some horrible blunders and foot and mouth situations, right? And it's just these can be avoided, right? If you hire from the player base, because then they know the language, they know the game. They've actually they don't get confused with what a Sino does and things like that. It's like, this is important, because if you're hired from a different game, even if you're really, really good, we had one in CCP in a while, in my opinion, a massive ace when it comes to game development. But even though he loved the idea of Eve, he was not a veteran, so he didn't have that connection. He needed to be taught and explained every single little detail to actually catch up. And when you hire people like that, I don't think they're useful until they've been in the game or in the CCP for about a year, because that's just how long it takes to figure out what is this strange place, what is this weird game, and how does it actually work? Because when you turn one knob, it just completely influences the rest of the game. This is not what game developers are used to, not in this way. So everything is so sensitive. And you have to really work with Eve with kitty gloves, because shocking the system will just anger the player base. And
when you say,
so sensitive to that.
How does Eve actually work, presumes that somebody knows how it actually works. I don't think it's that kind of a game. It's not building towards a result. It's more a laboratory of experiments, and you have scientists that come in with new ideas. You need them to come in from outside the realm of universe that has already been explored to some degree.
Yeah,
but it depends on the position.
there's a degree of that. Like, I mean, we're kind of sort of coming round to, you know, the entire idea as to what this main topic is, which is unique selling point of Eve, right? And I kind of feel like if you have devs who kind of understand the unique aspect of Eve, because they've come from, you know, like an origin of, you know, playing the game and coming to playing the game from other games, and realizing the uniqueness that Eve has. I think it's a little easier to be able to get them up to speed as to what's unique about Eve and what needs to be what needs to shine about Eve if they come from the player base.
And it's a learning process. Of course, they could maybe solve this with a few instructional videos and workshops with new hires to actually explain the game. And I think CCP should actually consider that, because explaining this game is so difficult. Every time you have you're in the company of other gamers and you start talking about Eve, you always get this, oh, I've heard about this, and what is it actually about? And then you're just in that situation of going, oh my God, I have to explain this. It's so
like
difficult.
Caleb. It's like if you've ever read the first book of from Andrew Groen, right, of Empires of Eve, right? Like, he has this section at the start of it, basically like, what is Eve? And he's basically like, the first bit of it is like, this is such a big thing, such a complex question to answer. It's ridiculous. Like, you literally can't.
Sit down and listen. This is going to take a while.
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
So basically, it's a big challenge to explain the game both to new players, but definitely also to developers. And I think this brings on the whole thing of what is it that makes this game so different, and it's really the fact that CCP somehow, and I still give credit to the original designer, which is a little bit of an obscure personality and got pushed out very early in Eve. He put in the DNA of this game, right? He basically managed to take the ideas of simulation and build something that could gamify that. So it's like the simplest variation of how you do this. It's in the time that this was done. Remember, we're back in the 90s, right? This was also something that was exploding in pen and paper. How do you create a world with a good cosmology and where things are balanced and all that stuff? You of course had the launch of things like the Dragonlance universe, and you had the Forgotten Realms universe for the fantasy players, right? And then of course you had World of Darkness being extremely popular, and the whole storyteller thing. A lot of that DNA is actually inside EVE Online, because when you go back and look at the first, well, at launch day, to me, the game resembled so much all the biggest dreams that role players could have. A sandbox where you can RP and play, and where the majority of stuff is handled by the actual server. This is exactly what we got. It was almost like a dream come true. And the fact that CCP had also then put all this effort into doing things like how the financial and trade and market stuff worked, how the industry worked, with the blueprints, with the building slots, with the different stations, with the massive amount of star systems and how you traveled. This was novel in a whole different level, something that had not been seen before. And ironically, because of the whole thing, how do you make this cycle of life ecosystem design that doesn't become extremely breakable like we saw in things like Ultima? Because simulation like that had been done before, and many have wanted to put it in their games. It's just no one has managed to simplify it in a way where it's not something that the players will actually end up breaking. So
and that's
I think
the thing, right?
They hit the magic sauce, and I can't explain. Yeah. Well, I can, but that's going to take like 3 hours.
I think the thing is, Caleb, I think it's like slow growth. I think the secret ingredient is slow growth. Like if you make a load of hype, you know, sort of for a game that you're releasing, and you have this like grand idea of having like some like really cool ecological kind of thing going on with all the NPCs and all that kind of stuff, and then you have this just huge influx of players coming in that just want nothing but just to cut, mine every resource, sort of kill every single, sort of like red cross that they see, all that kind of stuff, right? You're gonna end in a situation where like your dream of an ecology inside of this game that you want to release just gets completely obliterated by the flood of activity that your players produce, right? So I think it's kind of like this build up of players getting used to it and being able to handle it.
Well, the players are representing the plants in the dome, right? I don't know if you remember I think it was NASA that did these experiments with a completely isolated dome to try and create an environment that you could live in. And when if you try to force these things into it, and you try to think how ecosystems should work, or the perfect garden, or the perfect closed, isolated ecosystem, if you try to do that by force, they seem to break down. And ironically, that NASA project actually did break down. But when you allow it to grow by itself, organically, find its own legs, exactly, and that's the slow growth that CCP pretty much had. They could tweak and turn knobs along the way, so the players created the ecosystem by their behavior. And of course, you can talk about funny facts that we started out with, like within the first few months, we broke one of the fundamentals when we started doing things like jet can mining and using battleships to actually mine with 8 lasers, and it was ridiculous. But
it wasn't like 2 million kind of players doing that all at the same time. It was like it was a small population to start off with.
Well, there was a lot of things that were breaking early on. I mean, there were no gate guns in LowSec, for instance, until and Concord could actually be tanked. Like, there was a lot of things.
It took a while until that was actually done, right? It took,
until somebody did it, and then you
1 or 2 years before someone figured out how to actually tank Concord and completely.
There were like no policies on griefing, right? Until people did that, and then behavior had to be modified.
But the thing is, back in that day, like there wasn't really a policy on griefing in general for the game, in the gaming industry. Like, the idea of a end user license agreement that or terms of service that basically said that you're not allowed to do certain things inside of the game world, aside from probably the most super egregious stuff, like just wasn't really a thing, back in the day anyway. Like now we do.
Well, I have a funny little parallel, because one of my early jobs when I was working in the entertainment industry was marketing UFC 1, 2, 3, 4 through 8, I think, for VHS, for video. And when the UFC first started, there were no rules. There literally were no rules. And people RP'd their discipline in, a karate suit or kickboxer pants or whatever. So it was very much like novelty. But within 2 or 3 fights, so many people got so badly hurt that they had to start putting in rules. So things change in order to shape what you have now, which is like a professional UFC, where people are athletes and they dress for the occasion, not for costumes. And I kind of feel like EVE had to do that too. They had to sharpen up. And that's why we have such a modern game so many years later.
Well, and this brings up something that you kind of hinted at, right? That very early on, of course, other game developers had started doing EULAs and trying to, let's just say, protect their customers. But very early on in EVE, when these things started happening, like griefing and scamming and stuff like that, CCP decided to stay hands off, because, well, if you wanted this dark and almost a neo-Gothic universe where everything is harsh and life is dangerous, having a hands-off policy is exactly what you wanted to do. Of course, we can go into a very deep discussion about griefing and how it could be handled and fixed a little bit in today's EVE. But back then you needed it, because you needed this whole thing to develop between animosity and collaboration, right? So I think that was actually how the garden started working.
Yeah, I think so. And like this all builds into, why, like, what really is the unique selling points of Eve, right? And the fact that CCP have kind of made like ecology to some degree actually work inside of Eve, almost with the players kind of almost central to that. Like it's not like an EverQuest thing where they try to sort of make an ecology out of like NPCs and then players came and just bulldozed it all. Like they grew the ecology with the player at the center, right?
And the important part of that is that there's a few very almost like bulletin entries that is really the core of what made Eve work. Of course, everyone knows about the fact that it's single shard. That means that there is no issue of someone being disconnected. Everyone is on the same server, in the same universe, potentially being able to contact, collaborate, and compete with each other everywhere, right? So that in itself is like the core of everything. It all is one universe. The second one is really the fact that they build this cycle or circle of life thing where everything, when it comes to the different player types, creates this interdependency. So when I shoot you in my ship, then you need a new ship, so you need to actually go and get the materials for that, or you need to buy it from someone that's gotten the materials, and I can actually also shoot that guy. So this is why we have this almost, in my opinion, perfect design between creation and destruction, life and death cycle. Not a lot of focus on that. Of course, we talk about faucets and sinks all the time, but we don't talk that much about the fact that this is the only game where, well, first of all, you have near full loot, you have near universal aggression opportunity, and when I need something, I either need to get it from you or I need to make it myself. This creates that whole cycle that makes the PvP work. Because yes, you can be an aggressive PvPer and just say, I just want to shoot people. Yeah, but if you do that, then you need to make sure that you balance your actual consumption and upkeep and the loot that you get with the number of losses. If you're too bad at it, you're going to be in a negative, you're going to be in the red, and you're going to have to then eventually go out and be a sheep if you're not good enough at being a wolf.
Well, you touched on the whole like almost full loot, right? A lot of games, sort of especially sort of survival games and stuff like that. They like love using this tag of full loot PvP, and like honestly, I can't think of a worse system. Like you need to have destruction, you need to have loss incurring in a game, otherwise like items just build up and build up and build up and build up, and then you have this, like an economy that like inside of a game that just runs away, and things end up becoming super cheap because there's such a mass amount of abundance, in the game, for them. So the fact that EVE Online isn't a full loot PvP game, when you blow stuff up, stuff dies invariably. You don't get every single piece of loot out of the thing that you shoot. Modules die, the ship dies, all this kind of thing.
Yeah, and the important point on that is that the way that the loot fairy works, that creates the sink in the game, right? So this is the alternative to building in something like what is, well, it's called cyclicals, things that are perishable goods, right? Where things have a lifespan. We don't have that in games much. We do have a little bit, but the point is, if you don't sink stuff out, you get the problem that Mac mentioned, accretion. The thing that pretty much have killed, or at least made all MMOs out there flat and boring eventually, is power creep and accretion. These two things, you have to have a design that takes care of that. CCP seems to have been lucky and have that from the beginning. Of course, it's not perfect, and we do have problems in EVE with accretion and with power creep, but not near anything that you see in other games, right?
No.
You do not have this every single year in patch. There's a new power level, new increase of the level cap and all this stuff. You don't have this. You basically, you have
costs
Titans.
$20.
Yeah, you have Titans and you have Keep Stars, and that's it. That's the biggest things in the game. Right now, they suffer from over proliferation and being too cheap, and that's a long discussion. But still,
we're working on that.
It's the closest to a working game without these things breaking it.
Yeah.
Are we talking about how Eve is different and better than most games, and there's nothing else like it?
There is nothing else. That's the whole point of this.
Like there's...
You can't find an alternative to Eve. You can find distractions from Eve. You can go and play other games. You can have fun in Valheim, and you can go play Assassin's Creed and all that stuff when you need a break. But if you want an alternative to Eve, that does not exist. There is nothing out there.
Going back to the thing about partial loot drop, which I think is a really interesting point that McLeod made there. But there is something that Eve has that maybe other games don't, and that is legacy gifting of wealth. So I play for 8 years. I accumulate a lot of stuff at that time, and then I leave the game and give all my stuff to my friend. You see people begging for stuff when somebody leaves. They're like, please, can I have your stuff? That's a huge transfer of wealth and advantage.
Yeah, and I would say that from an economic point of view, this being a little bit my pet thing, this is not bad. This is actually a feature when you think about it, Matt, because this puts the whole game in perspective. The fact that you have a game that is 18 years of history, where every year something meaningful happens. Every year have different events, different player things. Stuff happens in Eve that goes in history books. Literally, we have 2 big history books written about Eve. And whether you've played for 6 years, 12 years, or 18 years, you will have a life history in Eve. You will accumulate wealth. You will accumulate contacts. You will have this connectedness with the world, because this is a living world. This is not just you running around from quest giver to quest giver. You are interacting primarily with other players. The fact that you do some PvE to actually sustain yourself is very much the fundamentals of a simulation, because someone needs to go and grow the corn, and someone needs to drive the bus and all that stuff. That feels like a PvE chore, but that is what drives the engine. The different thing is that because it's so historical, because it's a living universe, because it's actually the players that matter more than the CCP designed tools, that is what makes this game work.
Okay, so we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, but we're not when we do. But we can't do it for hours and hours and hours specifically here, because like we're trying to keep to a schedule and stuff like that. But what I would say is, if you're interested in this topic, we're going to be in the Discord channel after the show, and we can discuss and talk about all the various different things, all your, take in, other people's viewpoints and all that kind of stuff. Like, just discuss how everybody kind of views, the positives and negatives of EVE Online, relating to other products and that kind of thing. But now we are going to go to a quick commercial break, and we'll be back for the final topic of the show. Hello and welcome back to the final part of the EuroShow. We're going to talk about something that's popped up into the news. Has sort of tangible links to EVE Online to some degree, because I think that's something. I think it's an aspect of EVE Online that maybe we haven't really kind of explored. And the EVE community hasn't really explored, but maybe we should. I don't know. But we're going to talk about a topic called NFTs. I don't know if you've ever seen anything on the news about NFTs. They're basically they're essentially a way to sell things, to sell like a whole bunch of different things. They're a way of being able to basically, to take something and say this is unique, and to be able to, say that I own something that's unique, essentially.
Since you're triggering me and stuff and deliberately browsing the internet for things to troll me with, I think you should at least tell people what NFT is an abbreviation of.
Okay. So NFT as an abbreviation means non-fungible tokens.
Yes,
it was the fungible one, because it's always it's a. Sorry, go for it.
You're trying to troll me, so I'm going to troll you. So please, Mr. McLeod, could you explain what fungible means?
Okay, so fungible basically means that it's not unique, right? So non-fungible means it's something unique. Why Caleb is triggered about this is because we're talking about something that is not really it's something that sort of market and finance people hate, because non-fungible things are things that you can't really build a sort of an economy or a sort of like a business, I guess, to some, or sort of like a a currency out of, like, right?
Let me take it for a second.
Okay.
When you're talking about things that are unique, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that it's the exact opposite of fungible. So something that is so unique that there is nothing like it out there. That is of interest to very wealthy people, the people that Matt all talked about a while ago in EVE. People that have stored a lot of wealth need to put it in something that keeps it safe.
Like $70 million worth of digital art, for example.
Yeah, well, and exactly, art is a very popular storage of wealth, especially specific and agreed upon artists. And then, of course, you can also talk about the speculative element, where you're buying into a new artist that might be an up-and-comer and might become valuable and of interest in the future. But fundamentally, the most important and relevant non-fungible good on the planet is fundamentally housing, right? Houses are not fungible, except that their utility is pretty much fungible. It doesn't matter if you live in a mansion or a shed, you have a roof over your head. It's just the quality that is different. But
you write like Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, and of course, examples of where there's an exception to this rule is that land used for utility is fundamentally fungible. You do not care that much, of course. If you don't speak the language, you might care. But fundamentally, if you're a farmer, you don't care if you have your farm in Spain or in the UK or in Sweden. It doesn't really matter if those areas can actually grow the same thing. Of course, then we can start talking about ecology and climate and all those differences. But the point is that if it can produce a product, then it doesn't matter where that farm exists. So there's a difference between what you use land for and how you invest in it. So, yeah. So, and again, the reason that, of course, since like forever, the biggest advice in finance has always been buy land, because God doesn't make any more of this. That is, of course, bringing us into the whole scarcity thing. But of course, humans can figure out how to hack that and do things like add technology so you can increase the yield, and add skill levels so you can increase the yield. And that means that you're getting potentially more and more out of the land. And it's the same with, well, you used to be able to build in 1 or 2 stories height, and now we can build buildings that's actually reached the maximum of known materials, where we're talking what's that tower in the Middle East? This is almost
Burj Khalifa. Burj Khalifa.
It's almost a kilometer high, right?
Yeah, I think it's something around about that. It's ridiculous.
Like that. Yeah. So we've done vertical stuff when we're talking about houses, and of course, in Eve, I have mentioned on several occasions that there's also the same that you can do with farms, with vertical farming. This is what you get with anomalies. So when you're talking about these things like non-fungible tokens, they are basically the crypto version of artificially introducing scarcity into an otherwise completely abundant universe. When you're talking digital stuff, which is fundamentally non-material, that means that everything is infinitely available. Whether I am creating and letting one guy download my software or everyone on the planet, there is fundamentally not a lot of difference. Maybe a little bit when you're talking about limitations like bandwidth and how long it takes to actually disseminate it. But in the internet, nothing is scarce.
That is true. Yeah. There's always an infinite supply of it, and even if you try and delete it from the internet, there's always going to be records. There's always going to be copies of it, and so I think a lot of people kind of get the
download a car.
Yeah, but I mean, you can if you have the 3D printers available, right, of the various different types, I'm pretty certain that you could probably download a car and print it out. You might have to. Some assembly may be required, but I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about NFTs is how can NFTs be a thing for electronic items when there's huge amounts of copies of those things, as you say, in abundance over the internet, right? And I think the best analogy that I've heard and that I've read from various different articles about this is like, the difference is like if you have one of those like sort of like baseball playing cards, or sort of like football playing cards, or whatever, like top trump sort of playing cards, right? There's many of them in existence, but if you have one that is signed by someone in particular, it's a unique item, and those things can sell for quite a lot of money,
Oh my God.
And in that kind of sense, that's how it works.
All this to say collector's items?
Yeah, it is. NFT is basically about making electronic collector's items.
And of course, we have most likely got a lot of audience here that's massively nerdy. And some of them might remember the drama and the catastrophe of when the comic book industry started doing these artificial scarcity, limited edition covers and all that shenanigans. And basically made every comic book reader a collector and a speculator. And it's just so toxic. This is not it's not good practice. You're fighting reality and you're making a mockery of human behavior, right? It's the same when you're talking about limited lithographs and stuff like that. You're bringing in artificial scarcity, and artificial scarcity is just fundamentally bad because it will be something that change humans' behavior, or it will be something that eventually will be breaking. This is where insert story about the tulip bubble and all that shenanigans. It's an affront to anyone that is interested in the physicality and the reality of financial movement and theories.
I mean, yeah, but I don't think it's meant to be something that works in that framework.
Not to derail too badly, but whenever I wonder where technology is going, I look at the entertainment industry for adults.
Well, I guess that's true.
Seems to fit right in.
But like the reason why I brought this subject up was kind of like because it sort of it kind of worked with like us talking about Eve in terms of unique selling points, but also like it came up in the news fairly recently, and I kind of thought like my initial take was like there's a lot of uniqueness not just to Eve, but like to what happens in Eve, because it's all player driven. It's all player, it's all part of a, sort of an evolving and sort of emerging kind of sort of aspect of Eve Online.
And this is
And
why
I kind of thought that it'd be interesting that, like, it's crazy to me that, considering how switched on EVE Online players are and how geeky EVE Online players are, that like nobody's, as far as I know, has thought about like, NFTs with regards to Eve and with regards to like sort of moments inside of Eve. Let's put it that way.
And this is where the difference between uniqueness and fungible is so important. And this is why I said that you need a little bit of a workshop or maybe a small degree to actually even start looking at and understanding EVE Online. Because if you don't understand how things like abundance affect an economy, how things like volatility affect an economy, how things like unique items affect an economy, you're going to have problems in EVE because we have all these things. We have AT ships. We have T2 original BPOs, right, that was handed out in a lottery, which basically made sure that this would become a limited good, right? That means that now it's unique. And that's also why these things have the price tags that they do, where the flip side of that is the abundance. How do you make sure that there is scalable availability of something without making it absolutely abundant? We have suffered through a period of massive abundance where the barrier of entry and the availability was just way too easy and too easy to brute force. It was basically like fishing before the 50s, right? But because the reality of the real world does not actually have infinity in abundance, we ended up killing the seas, right? And it's similar to how we've done the opposite with the EVE economy. We've just completely devalued the majority of items. So people just doing I know that Mac kind of remembers the whole joke with the Titan conga line. Well, I see the whole thing that Pappy just did in the invasion of Delve, with just a whole pearl necklace of keep stars all the way into Delve proper. It's like, that's borderline ridiculous when you're talking about game design, that these things have gone so cheap that you can use them in this way.
I think of it as a big military effort, and that's a railway to supply.
No, but it's just from an economic point of view, having conga lines of Titans should not be a thing. Having bait balls full of several hundred Titans fighting at once should really not be a thing, because this is an end level thing. So if it doesn't have the rarity, it is no longer the end level. So
well, I think end level. I think honestly, in terms of end level, that term, it is just such a misnomer. It's such a bad kind of idea to get yourself into, that something should be end level, that something should be the pinnacle of what you can do. I think in various different ways, EVE players kind of redefine what is like end level. Like, you might have a whole bunch of super carriers, but like, you never know, there might be that situation where a bunch of Titans come in and nuke it out of existence, right? That was tried, that failed, yeah, fair enough. But like, who's to say that CCP puts in, ways and means for, other groups to be able to try that sort of thing again. And, yeah, fair enough. People may look at sort of things like Titans and stuff as end level, but like, it's what you do with them and it's how you utilize them that really counts.
Yeah, and this brings me back to the fact that these unique items that we have in EVE, that is a storage of wealth in the form of things like the T2 BPOs and the AT ships. In EVE, it makes sense, right? It makes sense that you add these unique items to the ecosystem and the economy, because it's something that is parallel with stuff in the real world. But it's parallel with stuff in the real world that has the same function. Like, BPOs basically reflect things like a patent, right? you have an added advantage that no one else really has easy access to or is allowed to do. Same with AT ships. They're like custom built things that no one else has. So yes, they have an advantage and they get a massive value increase, right? There's only a limited amount of DeLoreans left in the world. So they are very sensitive to this. There's only a limited amount of collector's veteran cars left when you're talking about things like the Porsche 911 originals and things like the Camaro original. These things are limited. We should have this because it reflects real life stuff. But something like an artificial, what is called a limited and unique digital product, is an oxymoron. It is literally.
I just like the idea of it being not a product, but a unique moment. That's the thing that I kind of thought was really interesting about it.
Well, I did sell one of my Titans recently because why not? And when I sold it, I thought nobody will ever know this was my Titan. It was an X-47 getting shot by the big red boat while I was announcing for INN, and it had a little bit of history to it. So what I did was I left the ship inside the hangar bay that said Matterall's Astero. I forget what the Sisters of Eve's battleship is called at the moment. So whoever gets that Titan, if they look in the trunk, they'll see my ID. And that's the best you can do unless you get this Titan destroyed and then it's permanently yours, because then you have a kill mail that represents and authenticates that was actually yours.
Yeah. Well, that's understandable.
Yeah, the Nestor, thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, we must draw this to a close, as it were. We're actually like 8 minutes over, but
One small thing.
Okay.
If we had walking in stations, corpses in Eve could actually become like relics that would be worshipped, because there's only that many fuzzy corpses in existence. There's only so many seagull corpses in existence, etc., etc. So we could really benefit from that whole meta level of crazy.
That's an interesting take on, to be fair. If you guys have we'd like to actually hear your views on it. And if you're watching this say on YouTube, then definitely comment and give us your thoughts on it. But in terms of if you're watching this live, definitely jump onto onto our Discord. There's a sort of a live chat room that we're going to be jumping down into after the show. But from me and Caleb and from Matterall, I think this is pretty much the end of this episode. Matterall, I think you have an episode later on in US time zone, right?
Yeah, 5 hours from now.
Mm-hmm. So
we'll have
definitely catch that.
Ashtarothi talking about Grand Prix and some of the shenanigans going on.
Yeah. So definitely check that out. But with regards to the second episode of the EuroShow, that'll be us. And have a good rest of the day.
That's a wrap.